The SEC and the Big Ten are going to reshape college football as we know it for better over the next few weeks. We'll explain.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, the most watched Ole Miss podcast out there, hosted by me, Steven Willis, a 10-year veteran member of the national media with Yahoo Sports and a former Ole Miss staff member. Today's show covers the biggest news of the week, and not as many people are talking about this as there should be. The SEC and the Big Ten are meeting starting today, and their goal, simply just reshaping college football as we know it. And the sport, which has undergone massive change over the last 5 years. And this proposal is exciting for one major reason to me: more high-level football every single game and every single year. And here's the kicker: it may not even matter what the smaller conferences think. We're free and available on all the podcast apps and on YouTube. Thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen every day. And a special hello to the insiders and everydayers who make the show what it is. Don't forget to find a second listen on the network. Chris Gordy at Locked On SEC or Corey Burton at Locked On Vandy. They provide other great perspectives on college football, the SEC, and even Ole Miss. So check them out. So last year in 2024, when they started talking about playoff expansion and they weren't going to be able to get the votes and all of this, and the SEC and the Big Ten started saber rattling at that point, to where they said, well, maybe us and the Big Ten will just go do our own playoff. And everybody got nervous and signed a memorandum of understanding to the SEC and the Big Ten about the distribution of revenue moving forward. But what they also did was basically cede all power over to the SEC and the Big Ten in the development of the new college football playoff. And the SEC and the Big Ten are taking that a couple of steps further, making something that could be transformative in the college football landscape. And ultimately, I think it's pretty good. Now, fans over the last couple of years, they've seen little pieces get taken away in the name of money or whatever's going on. A little bit of what we love has gotten taken away. SID departments have been ultra secretive and removed access to the program and knowledge of the program in an age where personal connection is as important as ever, and now it's basically non-existent. The fans have been screwed over at every single turn as college football has changed, to the point where right now collectives are basically leaning on the fan base in order to pay players. It's basically a donation system that they have set up. The fans have been getting screwed. So whenever I take joy and take excitement over the fans actually winning something potentially, everybody take hold of what I'm talking about. And the fans are ultimately the biggest winner of this thing. Now, Matt Hayes from the USA Today says college football's playoffs meetings is not about expansion. It's about college sports survival. Everybody is going to talk about the automatic qualifiers. That's going to be the thing. The SEC and the Big Ten, they want 4 automatic qualifiers, and that is what everybody is going to yell about. So anybody that talks about this, that is what they're seeing. That automatic qualifier is going to be the top of their argument of what's going on and why this is bad, because the SEC and the Big Ten are wanting 4 automatic qualifiers apiece for a 16-team potential playoff. But the reality of this is it goes so much farther, and it is transformative in the way that college football is watched and puts the meaning back on the conferences as opposed to the playoffs to get into the tournament. That's interesting. The important thing about this, honestly, is going to be the emphasis that is returned to the colleges' conferences. So we'll see what's going on. And here's the kicker: because of that memorandum of understanding that I talked about earlier in the show, unlike the first college football playoff contract, which ends after the 2025 season, next season, the SEC and the Big Ten won't need a unanimous vote from the bowl subdivision conferences in Notre Dame to change the format. Beginning with 2026, there are actually some in the industry that believe the Big Ten and the SEC won't even need a majority. They'll simply need to agree with each other to initiate change. That's why this meeting is so important that the SEC and the Big Ten is having before they present it to the college football committee, what they're going to do at the end of February. So when everybody's talking about what could happen and what's on the table and where it is, there's still a little bit of wiggle room of how they're going to do it. But the basic synopsis of everything is pretty good. And we're going to start with the expanded playoff. They want to expand the playoff to 14 teams with 3 at-large bids, or 16 teams with 3 at-large bids, or 16 teams with 14 teams with 1 at-large bids, or 16 teams at 3 at-large bids. I typed that out wrong. That was weird. Everyone also will be focused on the automatic qualifier. We just talked about that just a second, but that's actually the least important feature of this playoff bracket. And the SEC, like we just said, doesn't even need a majority thanks to a 2024 memorandum of understanding where other conferences basically ceded all power in order to do this to the Southeastern Conference. It's a pretty big deal. You know, whenever you talk about what's going on in this proposal and in these playoff proposals, it's a pretty big step. The playoff was a 12-team race. The format was absolutely wrong. It was very, very bad, the product that was put on the field and in the bracket in the 12-team playoff, and it wasn't because of the teams that were involved. Everybody wants to get onto Indiana or Georgia or Tennessee or Penn State or anybody like that, but the reality is the 12-team playoff was formatted with them having their thumbs on the scale to where they can control what's going on. Ohio State shouldn't have been seated so low. Those teams that were playing as the host teams in the 5 through 8 range were the best teams in the tournament. And when you got to the point where the thumb were on the scale, they were playing against Boise State and Arizona State, who had buys and got to go on just because they won a conference that was below the Big Ten and the SEC. It just was. That's just the way this worked. So that format needed to change, and this is an opportunity for them to change that format. You have a chance. I do think it will generally be 16 teams. The Big Ten is pro 16. The SEC is pro 14, and all they have to do is agree on it. The SEC is not against the 16-team playoff because of the 4 automatic qualifying bids. So we'll see. I think it's going to 16, and everything is going to start to look a whole lot more uniform over the coming weeks. Now, when we come back, we're going to break down on the collateral stuff that makes this so awesome potentially for college football fans. So stick around for that. You know, this message is from our sponsor, Intuit TurboTax. Taxes that was dealing with piles of paperwork and frustrating forms and waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to be able to get money back at all. Now taxes are as easy as uploading your forms to a TurboTax expert who is matched with your unique tax situation. An expert who is backed by the latest technology, which cross-checks millions of data points for 100% accuracy. While they work on your taxes, you get real-time updates on their progress, and you get the most money back guaranteed, all while you wait and go about your day. No stressing, no worrying, honestly, no waiting. Now, this is taxes Intuit TurboTax. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. It is only available with TurboTax live full service. Real-time updates are only available in the iOS mobile app, and see guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. So, turning the page to the collateral effect of this playoff expansion. And like I said, the automatic qualifiers in the playoff, that's going to get all the headlines, but that's not the important thing of this proposal. We talked about it at the beginning because it's the way that it is all being presented by everybody, but the important thing are the extra things that are happening. And we are going to start out with Championship Week, okay? Championship Week is a big deal. The SEC title game, those are real things. But in the age of the playoffs, conferences found that Georgia versus Texas was just a meaningless game. We heard that Lane Kiffin said that coaches did not want to go to Atlanta for fear that it would cost them the playoff. The playoff became the ultimate thing. So SEC title game, Big Ten title game, ACC title game, Big 12 title game, they lost their luster a little bit. So the SEC and other conferences started to try and figure out what to do and how to handle this. So they've come up with a couple of things where it could go several different directions, but I think I'll tell you exactly how I'm going to think it's going to look. But the way it looks is the conference playing games are on the playoff, for the playoff are on the table for the Southeastern Conference and the Big Ten and all of that. It's going to work similarly to English soccer's promotion playoff as a true play-in game, and the SEC and the Big Ten will match. We'll go over that in just a second. I think this is, in the end, is going to land on 3 games. You will have the championship game, 1 and 2, with both of those teams getting automatic qualifiers into the tournament. Then you will have 2 play-in games featuring number 3 versus number 6 in the Southeastern Conference and number 4 versus number 5. Now, there's another way that this was looked at, as one SEC athletic director was speaking on a condition of anonymity of the sensitivity of the process, gave a rough outline of what championship weekend could look like to USA Today Sports. The Big Ten is also considering a similar structure. Like I said, they were match. The 2 top seeds play in the conference championship game. The next 6 teams, determined by conference tiebreakers if needed, will play in a 3 versus number 8, a 4 versus number 7, and a number 5 versus number 6 format. The winners of those 4 games would move on to the college football playoff. The losers would be available for at-large selections. The obvious wrinkle of that one is the number 2 team, the runner-up in the SEC title game, isn't guaranteed to spot in the college football playoff. That's the reason I gave the example that I gave, because I do not think they will go this far. Now, what it would look like if this happened this year, the extended games would be Ole Miss at Tennessee, Texas A&M at Alabama, and South Carolina at LSU, with the winners advancing to a 14 or 16 team college football playoff. This would make all the money. It would make all the money. If you want to look at the Big Ten, Oregon and Penn State would have played in the title game. The remaining playing games would have been Minnesota and Indiana, Michigan and Ohio State, a rematch, and Iowa at Illinois. All of the money and all of this content would be added, because the rub in this whole deal is, if you are going to rev share, and I do think the players deserve to be paid and all of that, but it is nice to see that the administrators are saying, we're going to play more games now. We're no longer going to be worried about the workload of a player. And what you're seeing is a format that is designed between both of those conferences to where basically everybody that is going to make the playoffs plays on conference championship Saturday. Then they all move into a 16-team playoff where everybody plays. Everybody is uniform and nobody has a direct advantage of what's going on. Like I said, it's either a 14 or a 16-team playoff. I think it's going to be a 16-team playoff because of each team playing at that particular moment. The Big 12, the ACC, those conferences are guaranteed 2 slots. So you could have a situation to where they just completely eliminate a title game to where the leader and the winner gets the automatic qualifier on that Saturday, and they go into a 2-3 game for their second spot and kind of play a playoff, little play-in game of the 2 and the 3 seed to see what goes on. So more teams in those conferences have a path as well. And of course, there's going to be a G5 slot as well. Now, if you lose one of the play-in games, if you lose a conference title game, you are going to be available to be picked for an at-large spot. Like I said, if it's 16 spots, You have to figure with Notre Dame, that's 2 at-large spots. That's basically the SEC and the Big Ten is going to end up getting 5 teams just about every year, including the runner-up of the conference championship game. The runner-up will be basically that extra play-in spot because they would be ranked somewhere around 7th, unless you're in a situation to where the conference champion is like the SEC West was in the late 90s, to where the champion of the SEC West might be 7-5 or 8-4. But the way it's situated, I think that's the way conference championship games are going to work, and they're just completely remaking them. Now, picture this, okay? We saw the Michigan-Ohio State game for the Big Ten. Can you picture a week later replaying the Egg Bowl in what would be a playoff play-in game? That would be the most volatile football game in the history of football games. It would be wonderful, absolutely wonderful. So we'll see how it goes, but I love this proposal. I absolutely love what is going on here and what could happen. Like I said, Ole Miss traveling to Tennessee last year for a shot at the playoffs would have been the best game potentially of the season. All over the country, the whole 9 yards, it potentially could have been the best game of the season with the defensive lines and the front sevens and the defensive backs that they had. Ole Miss probably had a better offense in the pass game. Tennessee had a much better run game. So it would have been a very, very good football game. LSU and South Carolina getting a redo after what happened in Columbia, in Baton Rouge. All of these games would have been absolutely fantastic as the play-in game going into the college football playoff. And the reality of the situation is those play-in games, you have like a 30-team playoff at that point because of those play-in games. So we'll see exactly how it looks moving forward. That gets me so fired up. You want to talk about collateral stuff that will be absolutely fantastic? That is a major, major check mark in a yay box for me. Anyway, 9 conference games and an added importance on every SEC matchup, plus a new SEC Big Ten challenge, bringing at least 10 high-level games a year. What does that mean for the future of college football? We break it all down next. All right, now the next thing that we need to talk about is some of the other collateral stuff. We talked about the SEC and the Big Ten kind of matching what they're doing. They're getting a format together. We can make jokes about the Power 2 all we want to, but a lot of that kind of is happening with this match. The SEC is going to 9 games, and let's be real about this. SEC teams have been canceling Power 5 non-conference games for 2 years. This has been a done deal for a while. The 9-game schedule was going to happen. People were freaking out about the college football playoff and all of that, and the committee for various reasons. But this 9-game schedule is going to happen, and the automatic qualifiers are going to be a big key in that, because if you put the emphasis back on the conference to where the Big Ten champion means something, or being in the Big Ten, or Big Ten conference games are the most important games on your schedule, or the SEC games are the most important games on your schedule. Non-conference games are basically, for lack of a better word, meaningless exhibitions. Still should play them. Everything should be fine. But all of a sudden, a game against the Citadel and a game against Georgia State isn't going to matter as much because of the way the schedule is going to be set up. 9 conference games. We've seen 2 years ago, it got put out that in the non-conference games, that's 3 permanent rivals, 6 rivals that rotate. You would play home and away at every team in the conference in a 4-year period. Now, I always like to make jokes that eligibility is a myth. But in this case, if you've got 4 years, you're going to play everywhere in the conference. And that is pretty awesome to see exactly what happens. So in this setup, 9 conference games, just like the Big Ten, everything is fine. You lose one of those cupcake matches. We talked about how this is a boon for the fans. This schedule is going to be excellent for fans. They are about to upgrade their schedule like crazy. You're going to have fans that want the schedule to be as easy as possible so they can make the playoffs. The automatic qualifiers make that null and void. Do not listen to that argument. The schedule is going to get a lot harder because it's okay if you take an L or two, because conference standings are ultimately going to be the most important part. And if they do the play-in game feature that we talked about in the last segment, you only have to finish in the top five in the the top half of the conference to have a shot to play to get into the play-in game. Doesn't necessarily matter. You have high-level football. The fans win. The TV networks win. Everybody wins except for people that just want cupcakes on their schedule. Now, my opinion, and I know this will not happen, they need to take it on a step further, in my opinion, and they need to remove the spring transfer window for football to where spring games and spring football can happen again. You can set it up to where you play FCS teams in your spring game. Furman, UT Martin, Mississippi Valley, Jackson State, it does not matter. Set those up for the spring game and make sure that they get taken care of. You pay the amount for them coming in, the $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year for them to come in for their athletic budget, but they're not on the fall schedule. You play a real football game at the end of spring. Doesn't matter if you win, doesn't matter if you lose, but you play that game to get ready and to help out the little guy. And the two games that actually matter on the schedule would be a G5 game regionally, 2 G5 games regionally, and then you have the 10 games that is kind of the meat of your schedule. So let's talk about this just real quick. All right. So we talked about a 9-game schedule, and the conference has been canceling conference games or non-conference games for 2 years. It would replace a cupcake on the schedule that fans don't want to see, and it puts everybody on equal footing since the conference games will raise the importance. You want more games if you want more important games. Now, there's also an SEC Big Ten Challenge that is being rumored. And what that is an annual football game between conferences. They are at the top of college football. There's really an AFC, NFC type thing that is developing in the Power 2, but it would be sold as a separate TV package outside the normal partners. I think it would be really cool, if we were going to be honest, if CBS got this one, just for the music, and the SEC and the Big Ten could be on CBS. That would be awesome. And in this rev share world, this is another opportunity to gain a revenue stream to boost ticket sales. This situation, what's going on, everybody in the Ole Miss fan base bitched about having to pay more for parking. They bitched about setting up in the Grove and how much that price is going up. This allows the athletic department to not raise season ticket prices either. Do something that helps the fans. That's another reason that this helps the fans, is it's going to make it to where you don't need necessarily to raise ticket prices. You've got a whole bunch of games that are going to be lined up, probably 16 per year. Games, Ole Miss and UCLA, Ole Miss and Oregon, Ole Miss and Washington, Ole Miss and Michigan, Penn State, Ohio State, Iowa, Michigan State. Those games that people have been wanting for a long time. You look on the schedule, Ole Miss has been scheduled with, I think, Indiana, but they don't traditionally play Big Ten level schools. This would give them an opportunity to do that. Trip up to Happy Valley. Maybe Penn State comes to Oxford, Mississippi, or Michigan, or Ohio State. It would be absolutely awesome. And with Ole Miss being at the top level of winning, the way they set this up is off a winning percentage. Each and every single year, whenever they did it for basketball, generally 1 plays 1, 2 plays 2, 3 plays 3, and they do it off a winning percentage. Ole Miss is the 3rd winning percentage team in the Southeastern Conference over the last 3 years. So the first time they do this, Ole Miss is likely going to play the third or the fourth rated Big Ten team, which means Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, those guys, you're probably going to walk in to get them. Now, Ole Miss doesn't have the name, so maybe it drops down and it's like an Ole Miss Wisconsin. That'd be awesome. That'd be fun. Ole Miss Oregon, something like that. So everybody should be fired up about this because this is going to lead to an exciting home game, I think, every other year in Oxford, Mississippi. Some really cool road trips to some storied venues in the Big Ten, maybe going out to the West Coast to USC or UCLA or Oregon or Washington. It should be a whole lot of fun. But the fact of the matter is, I've talked about this for the last 25 minutes. Listen to what I said. It is all good what I'm saying. Now, if you just stop at, oh, the SEC wants 4 automatic qualifiers, I'm not a fan of automatic qualifiers. But if the automatic qualifiers gets me this, yes, I'm all about it. And I will ride or die with this proposal. Because at the end of the day, all football fans want more meaningful football. Everybody. They don't want easy football. They don't want gimmies. They don't want anything like that. They want more meaningful football, and this would do that. Think about 10 games per year that is actually really meaningful football. And then you play the Citadel or Georgia State for your other two. But the way it's set up, it's a pretty good situation for Ole Miss as well. So thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your go-to source for Ole Miss sports. We pride ourselves on offering the most comprehensive perspectives, which is why we're the number one Ole Miss podcast out there, no doubt. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen today. For your second listen, check out Locked On SEC podcast. Host Chris Gordy holds no punches, covering the best conference in all of college sports. Find Locked On SEC on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Hotty toddy, everybody. And remember, analytics is just the old English word that means bad football. See you tomorrow.